Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you are. Hopefully everybody can hear me and hopefully everybody can see the presentation. Thanks again for joining us, and hopefully this will be informative and useful to everybody as we go forward. Today we're gonna talk about some of the industry and technology trends that are influencing parking facility design, and our thoughts on how they impact our design process and our design approach. In the interest of everyone's time, being respectful for everyone's time, and to keep this presentation at about an hour, which is my goal, this is going to be a pretty broad overview on a whole variety of topics. And my intent here is to stimulate thought and have you guys think about how this might apply to your own projects, and then, offline, let's have a one-on-one conversation and take a deep dive into one or more of these topics as they relate to your particular project. Here's a broad outline of what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about spend about 30 seconds talking about who I am and what I've done, and who WGI is in particular. Then we're going to cover our design philosophy, look at some things that are going on in the automotive industry, some things that are current in the building development side of things, talk a little bit about parking ops and technology, and then finish up with a brief run through of what sustainable design looks like for parking facilities, and then open it up to some questions. If you do have questions along the way and something stimulates a thought, just pop it in the chat. Kelly with our group is going to be monitoring that, and he'll I'm going to take brief pauses, and Kelly can interrupt me if you have specific questions that I'll try to address as we go along. That's me. I've always thought that photo looked a little weird, like they stretched my head or something, but it looks okay. Anyway, I'm a parking consultant. It's Rob McConnell, parking consultant, vice president of parking solutions with WGI. Been a parking consultant for nearly 30 years. I'm a corrupted structural engineer. I still do structural engineering, but most of my stuff is very parking focused, and I'm a member of the Parking Consultants Council, for those of you know what that is. And I've actually tracked most of my projects over the years, and at this point I'm well over 400 different parking consulting and design projects for a whole variety of clients. Why am I a parking nerd? Well, I don't know, but the Fisher Price parking garage was one of my favorite toys as a little kid, and on the right there you see my first attempt in probably first grade, maybe kindergarten, at building my own parking structure for my Hot Wheels cars. So I am definitely a parking nerd. I've been thinking about this sort of thing for a long time. All right. Ooh, went one too far here. Hold on a second. So who is WGI? Well, WGI is a full service design, consulting, engineering firm, planning firm. We have offices all around the country. We do everything, primarily transportation related, but my focus in particular is on parking and actually structural engineering more broadly within our whole buildings group. As I mentioned, we've got a whole bunch of offices all over the place. Here's a map, a lot in Texas, a lot in Florida, and we are expanding rapidly. So enough about us. Let's talk about our design philosophy as it comes to parking facilities. The foremost thing that you need to keep in mind is that parking is not really about storing cars. It is, but that's not really what it's about. It's really about the people that are in those cars, and it's really about creating the first and last impression of the venue that these people are driving to. Nobody wants to think about parking. They want to enjoy their concert, their dinner, their shopping experience. And the first thing they got to do before they get there is they got to park. And the last thing they do when they leave is they got to retrieve their car and drive away. Parking's about offering convenient options and choices. Parking's a very emotional purchase. So people are willing to walk a little bit further and pay a cheaper parking rate, or people want to park right up in the front door and have the convenience associated with that. It's a very emotional thing. Parking is also about creating safe and comfortable environments for people to be and store their cars. You know, where do all the scenes in the movies happen where the bad guys are lurking? They're in parking garages, right? And so our job is to break that stereotype and create spaces and experiences that are comfortable and safe. And then it's also about addressing the unique needs of your particular constituency, whoever that might be. When we think about parking design, just in broad terms, we think about three primary stakeholders: the users of the facility, the owner of the facility, and the surrounding community. The community may be, if you're in a university setting, it might be the university campus or the neighborhood surrounding the campus. If you're at an airport, it might be the airport grounds. If you're a municipal facility, it might be the buildings next door and a couple blocks in each direction. But everybody's got a stake in a parking facility. A user wants a facility that is convenient to use. It parks itself, basically. Get in, get out quickly, get to your destination. As you transition from vehicle to pedestrian and back, it's got to be safe and secure and convey you where you need to be readily and easily. As an owner, obviously you want happy patrons, but you also want something that doesn't cost an arm and a leg to build at the outset, and you want something that's easy to maintain, durable, and something that hopefully is going to stand the test of time. It's going to be able to accommodate future advances in technology or changes in the way we use cars and other forms of transit. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the community, they want something that looks nice, obviously, and something that creates a public benefit, solves whatever parking issue that might be in play there. But also something that's sustainable and just generally nice to have in the community. And we take all these pieces and parts and we assimilate them together and balance, one interest versus the other interest, and come up with what we call an integrated parking design, very broadly incorporating all these things. And everything's a custom fit. Everything is tailored to the specifics of your situation and project. So let's talk, before I move on there, any questions about that? Any questions? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to talk first or talk next about some of the automotive trends, some of the things that are going on in the automotive industry right now. Before we get into any of the specifics of facility design, let's think about what's happening with cars. So first thing is that car sales are continuing to go up. There's about 3 million more cars on the road projected this year than there were last year. Some of that has to do with COVID, but that's just a general trend. It's about a 1% increase, and that's something that we've seen year on year going back. And as you can see in this breakdown here, it's still pretty large vehicles, crossovers, pickups, SUVs still make up a big piece of it. So it's not subcompact cars and things like that. It's still a fairly significant vehicle. What is that vehicle? Right now, the 85th percentile vehicle on the road right now is is roughly the size of a Buick Enclave, which is a crossover, or an SUV, if you want to call it that. And we size all of our parking spaces, or most of our parking spaces in the different localities around, based on this 85 percentile, 85th percentile vehicle. In dense urban areas, we might go a little tighter because there's a greater concentration of smaller cars, and obviously real estate's more expensive. But the bottom line is that cars are not really getting smaller. Oops, sorry, got a little bit of lag here. So prior to COVID, many futurists and prognosticators were predicting the demise of personal vehicle ownership, especially in urban areas, in favor of shared transport like mass transit and ride sharing and so on and so forth. And as you all are probably aware, COVID was a pretty significant disruptor in that. Right, during the summer last year, we were looking at in the fall, we were looking at 80% decline in Uber and Lyft ridership. They surveyed customers, and something like 15% of the people were talking about being interested in using mass transit. So there was definitely a trend, partially caused by COVID, towards private vehicles and away from some of these more shared transportation options. Additionally, car sales have gone up pretty dramatically as people have shifted to personal transit, and possibly in certain areas like New York, moved out of the urban core towards more suburban settings, and with the sort of the change in paradigm that we've experienced with the remote working and telecommuting, people have evolved towards staying within their community rather than commuting into town, and we anticipate that a lot of that is going to kind of be baked into the system now. It's going to be part of the way we work and commute and do business moving forward. Ride sharing, I will say, ride sharing will likely bounce back, and we're already starting to see that a little bit. But keep in mind, ride sharing is not a terribly equitable system. It requires a credit card, and it really caters towards a more affluent set of folks. And the last set of statistics I saw was that the vast majority of people are using rideshare to get to the airport, or to go to entertainment venues, or to go out to dinner. Basically using it as a designated driver. And there are very few people that are using it on a daily basis to commute. So what does that mean? It means that COVID has allowed people to realize, or made people realize, that they have a whole bunch of different options on where they go and how they get there. And they're unlikely to give up these options anytime soon. And these options might include bikes or e-scooters. I know that we've seen e-scooters explode in certain urban areas, and not literally explode, but explode in population in certain urban areas. I know there are certain markets that the Vespa style scooters are hugely popular. The bottom line is people have discovered the options, and they're unlikely to give them up. And one statistic I found was interesting, was that the number of e-scooters out there is expected to, or the number of e-scooter trips worldwide is expected to exceed 500 million this year, which is kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. Any questions as I move on here? Kelly, anything coming up?
No.
All right, thanks. So these are going to be around for the foreseeable future. What does that mean for parking facility design? That means, so if you take the fact that there's more personal vehicles on the road, and there's a decrease in public transit and ride sharing, at least for the immediate future, that means that there's going to be increased demand for parking. So we fully expect parking demand, at least in the next few years, to go up. And then maybe as the new normal gets digested into our lives, then we'll start to see where that trends after that. And then the other point to take away from this is that people want options, and personal vehicles still remain at the top of the list of those options in most communities, other than the densest urban environments. Okay, another automotive trend is electric vehicles. I'm sure everybody has seen at least one Tesla in the last 24 hours. That compare that with 5 years ago, where you would be hard pressed to find an electric vehicle on your daily commute. They seem to be ubiquitous, and basically there's starting to be more models out there that people are actually interested in buying, not the boxy looking things that were not very popular earlier when this technology was a little newer. We expect to see electric vehicles continue to increase as a sector, or as a segment of the automotive population, and some of that's going to be driven by environmental standards in the U.S. and in Europe, as well as China, who are the three kind of major markets for vehicles in general. So what does that mean? That means that we expect EV charging to become more and more prevalent in garages, and we are already starting to see that building codes, state building codes, and local zoning ordinances are starting to require minimum numbers of charging stations in garages. I heard a rumor that the National Electric Code has some language in there that can be interpreted as requiring a minimum number of charging, or a minimum electric vehicle charging capacity. I haven't vetted that out completely, but just be prepared, it's coming. The other takeaway here would be that as electric vehicles become more prevalent and everybody has them, the idea of providing preferred parking for electric vehicles becomes less of a concern, because if everybody has them, you don't provide preferred parking for everybody. All right, any questions on electric vehicles? Okay. So the next topic, and it's interesting because Florian, I think, just popped in with a question that relates to this. The use of carbon fiber and composites in vehicles is increasing. It's part of the environmental sustainability mandates and fuel economy mandates that are coming out in the U.S. and around the world. We're needing to make vehicles lighter so that it takes less fuel to get them from point A to point B, and the best way to do that is generally thought to be with plastics and carbon fiber. The reduction in weight can increase fuel efficiency pretty dramatically, and it's expected to continue in that direction with more and more of your car becoming plastic. But what does that mean for us? Well, the downside of that is that plastic burns, and when it burns, it can cause some pretty nasty chemicals and smoke. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen a firefighters fight a car fire, and I use air quotes around fight because most of the time they just sit there and let it burn because they can't really do much about it, just maybe wet down the pavement around it so it doesn't spread. But because and more of cars, including the fuel tanks, are made out of plastic and they burn more readily. The latest edition of the International Building Code, based on this and some data from a couple of nasty fires in London or in England, now require garages, open parking garages, which previously you did not have to do any sort of fire sprinkling or anything like that. Anything now over 48,000 square feet, even if it's an open parking garage, requires fire sprinklers under the 2021 code, which is a pretty significant increase. Any questions about electric vehicles before I move on? All right, let's talk about autonomous vehicles. I assume that everybody has seen some variation of this chart. This is the Society of Automotive Engineers levels of automation. Level zero is basically no automation. Level 5 on the other extreme is basically robot taxis driving around with, no user control at all. And you've got the spectrum in between. Defining the difference between level 2 and level 3 is a little nuanced, but basically level 2 has the driver, the actual person in the car, doing most of the driving tasks with the vehicle helping, with features like adaptive cruise control and braking, lane centering, and that sort of thing. Level 3 is pretty similar, but it has the car, or the brains of the car, doing most of the control, with the driver occasionally stepping in to help out when necessary. Right now, we're at about an automation level 2, 2.5. Some of the Tesla stuff is kind of pushing 3 in certain environments, but it's not, it's in typical urban, commuter traffic. It's not really that autonomous. A variety of the manufacturers plan to deploy level 3 this year. We'll see, but I know the technology exists, and it's coming relatively soon. The flip side of that is that level 4, where basically the driver doesn't have to take control except in the most extreme circumstances, is still a ways away. There's a ton of technological and legislative and everything considerations for that to happen. What are the potential benefits of autonomous vehicles? You have the potential for fewer accidents. Theoretically, the system, the driving system of an autonomous vehicle is constantly monitoring without distractions, and a microchip's reaction time is, infinitesimally quicker, or is infinitesimal, and therefore very much quicker than the human. If you can take your hands off the wheel and let somebody else do the driving, theoretically, it would make your commute more productive. It would allow people who are blind or disabled and for whatever can't drive to have mobility. And at some point, if we get to a model where we have the robot taxis, the shared vehicles, you could potentially reduce the price of vehicle ownership and increase access to cars as a means of transportation. Here's some futurists back in the 50s view of sort of an idealized world with autonomous vehicles. It always kind of cracks me up a little bit. And then you have the technology to drive and the car to control itself, but the folks are still playing board games. I guess they didn't have the foresight to see everybody kind of plugged into their own device and sitting kind of ignoring everybody else. That's my black sense of humor there. So what are the barriers, the potential barriers to fully autonomous vehicles? Well, obviously everybody's seen the safety events and the safety incidents and the accident that happened in Phoenix and others. So there's a little bit of a reluctance, or there seems to be a little bit of a reluctance of people to dive in, into the ownership side of AVs, at least when they're asked. Technology isn't really there yet. It's terabytes of processing and data storage and connectivity, and I mentioned the government regulations, competition with mass transit. Be aware that in urban areas, the paying customers for mass transit, if they switch to ride sharing, then that's taking the paying customers out of the mass transit system. So there's some concerns there, and so on. The convenience factor is another one. I mean, think about all the stuff that you have in your car. If you've got kids, you got baby seats. If you might have your golf clubs or whatever in the back, or your junk in the back. Are we really going to give that up in favor of a shared vehicle? I don't know. Maybe. So what does that mean for us at this point? That means that we've got to plan for a future with autonomous vehicles, and we have a planning model called Flexpark, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, to make buildings more adaptable in the future. What about my flying car, you say? When am I going to get my George Jetson vehicle? Well, short answer is not anytime soon. Right now, there's only one state in the country, in the U.S., that even remotely allows anything like that. There are a handful that are theoretically in production. They're not really cars, though. They're airplanes that can drive on the road, and they're doggone expensive. So, and then of course, if and when those happen, or if and when flying cars start to become commercially available, do you really want to be in a world where you have to look for traffic in 3 dimensions rather than 2 dimensions? That's a little scary, but maybe someday. All right. I've seen a variety of questions here. Somebody says, does autonomous suggest no doors? No, just some of the images that I have were showing cutaways, they're concept vehicles. There's a lot of good questions here. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get to all of them before I get into the development trends here. In the interest of time, I will table the questions and try to hit them at the end, or table some of these questions I haven't addressed and hit them at the end. Let's talk about development. Building development is what I'm talking about here. So let's talk about what it costs to build parking. Surface parking right now, somewhere in the $2,500 to $5,000 per space, depending on the infrastructure that you have to put in. Structured parking as of this time last year was about $22,200 at a national median. I suspect, and our cost model is coming out here in the next month, next 30 days, say, and I suspect we're going to see somewhere in the range of about 10% increase in cost. COVID again did a number on a variety of things, and as most of you are probably aware, there's some pretty crazy stuff going on with some of the materials and certainly employees. It's challenging to find people right now. Underground parking is about twice the cost of above grade structured parking. And then of course, once you build the parking, that's only the first piece of the equation. You still have to figure in the operating cost. And on average, that's probably in the $350 per stall per year for a garage, a little less for a surface parking. Obviously, that's going to vary depending on where you are. If you live in the upper Midwest, you're going to have snow removal associated with that. If you're running a valet system or something like that, your cost could be much higher. If you got a bare bones operation, your cost might be lower, but there's some basic amount of maintenance and upkeep that you have to take into consideration. So what does it take to design and construct a new parking structure? How long? Well, it takes about, call it 6 months to design a facility, maybe a little quicker if you do it certain ways, maybe a little longer if you've got a long review process. And then it takes about a year to build a typical 500 car garage, standalone type garage. A little bigger means a little longer. You could probably do it, in 8 months if it was, say, a 250 car garage or something. As far as the trends in development right now that we're seeing, what we're being asked to do or look at. The first trend is the intermodal facility. This is not a particularly new concept. They've been around for probably 20 years or more. But the intent here is to capture personal vehicles at the perimeters, or at the edges of an urban area, and convert these people into transit passengers, usually rail transit. But most of the facilities we're doing have a rail component and a bus component to them. And the idea is to get personal vehicles off the road before they get into the urban core. The next trend in development kind of is at the other end of the park, the other end of the rail line, if you want to think about it, and that's developments in the urban core, usually urban infill type developments, and almost all of these that we're seeing have some mixed use component to them. The idea there is to create a live, work, play park facility in one facility so that everything's available within a 10 to 15 minute walk, using the park once philosophy. You don't get up to move your car to go eat and then come back. Everything is there within walking distance. And then sort of a subset of the mixed use development is the transit oriented development. And again, that's a mixed use development typically usually involves residential of some sort that is within walking distance to a significant transit hub of some sort within the urban core. What does that mean for parking, or what does that look like in parking facilities? And after I put this slide together, and I didn't realize at the time, but every single one of these projects is in Colorado, and I don't know that certainly wasn't intentional, but there's several that I have worked on in the past. And the top left is government parking up above with a post office in it, full service post office and retail at grade. The one on the right, you've got higher ed with offices and campus security and retail. Bottom left is commercial, two-story commercial, grade level retail, offices on the second floor. There's also public safety in there as well, with parking tucked in. And then on the bottom right, you've got residential above parking, above retail. Then there's actually the residential parking below grade there. So that's an interesting one in and of itself. Any questions about that before I move on to mechanical parking? Somebody asked the question, what is a stall? when I talk about stalls, I'm referring to parking stalls, parking space, another name for it. So let's talk a little bit about mechanical parking, and specifically automatic or automated mechanical parking, as opposed to manual mechanical parking. Manual mechanical parking might be a vehicle lift or a hoist that's manually operated. I'm specifically referring to this as automated mechanical parking. Basically, the systems that have the brains to take your car, store it somewhere, and then when you come back, retrieve it for you and get it to the point where you can drive it away. I'm sure you've probably seen the Carvana or Carvana, however you want to pronounce it, towers, the vending machines. That's a little bit of a novelty, but it's a variation on this mechanical parking system. Where do mechanical parking systems work best? They work best for very small sites. They work best where you're dealing with smaller number of vehicles and relatively low peak hour volumes. You can handle larger volumes, but the more vehicles that you have arriving and departing at a given time means you got to have more cabins and more elevators, and that's a big piece of the infrastructure there. So usually they become cost prohibitive, it's space prohibitive. So they tend to work better for smaller facilities with lower peak volumes. They tend to work better for people who are familiar with how to use them, using them on a repeat basis. And we're working on a number of them that are integrated into mixed use facilities. Right now, if I had to guess, I would say there's about 100 in the U.S. that are operational. A lot of them are very small, a couple dozen vehicles, and there are plenty of them around the world. Though they have been more embraced and have been around for decades in Europe and in Asia. So they're around, and we'll see more and more of them. Somebody asked about the price point of mechanical parking. Well, mechanical parking tends to be pretty expensive. You got the mechanical parking system itself, and then you've got the building that kind of surrounds the mechanical parking. All the data that we have suggests, and this is very generalized, I know there's some mechanical parking guys on the call, so don't get bent out of shape about this, but all the data suggests that it's about twice the price all in per stall or per car to do mechanical parking. But if you're in a situation where it's either mechanical parking or nothing, then the choice becomes obvious. There's also pretty high maintenance costs, about twice that $350 per stall per year for maintenance. For a regular self-park, it's closer to 700, a little bit over 700 per stall per year for mechanical parking. What are the different types of mechanical parking systems? Well, rack and rail is one. That's the cars palletized and then stored similar to an automated warehouse. There's the robot valet systems. Challenges with that a little bit has to do with they can't navigate slope floors very well, but in certain flat areas they work pretty well. The crane system in the middle there, that's the Carvana system, or that's a variant on the Carvana system. The rotary system is basically just a carousel. Those things have been around for 100 years. And then the puzzle park system, which is somewhere between a rotary system and a rack and rail system. The reason they're called puzzle park systems is because if you remember the little finger puzzles that you used to have as a kid, the little square things that had an empty tile missing, and you shifted the tiles around to try to solve the puzzle. That's more or less how cars shift around and within the system there, up and down, side to side, and so on. So what's the process? The process is you drive your car typically into a transfer cabin. The transfer cabin scans the vehicle, palletizes it in some form, and you basically transact with the either on your mobile phone or on through a kiosk. Takes your car and stores it somewhere, and then at some point you come back and you either retrieve your car via mobile app or via kiosk again, and the system retrieves your car. Any questions? Any further questions on mechanical parking before I get into the next topic here? I know we got about 15 minutes left, so I've got to hustle. So another development trend that we're asked is, what does the future of a parking facility look like when we get to an autonomous point or autonomous future? And this is a conceptual rendering of what an autonomous or a parking facility that caters to autonomous vehicles might look like. You have a drop-off area, concierge area, where you get out of your car and you go do your thing upstairs or in the next building over, and your car then goes and parks itself in the garage. You notice that everything's very tightly stored in there, and at some point you get ready to retrieve your car, you call it up on your phone, it retrieves itself, and then you go downstairs and it's waiting for you at the gate. So that's sort of an artist concept of what that might look like. Where do we fit in? We have the Flexpark planning model. Flexpark is our process for understanding your particular situation and helping to understand what a facility might be, or how to design a facility for your particular space that considers adaptive reuse for a future where, number one, vehicles are more autonomous, and number two, perhaps there's less demand for personal vehicles based on shared vehicle use being more prevalent. What goes into adaptive or what goes into a facility that is designed for adaptive reuse? Parking structures have sloping floors. There's not much that can be done about that. There's water and snow and whatnot that gets tracked into parking facilities, and you got to design the floors to drain. So you got to figure out a way to level the floor, keep the floors as level as they can be, provide drainage, but then figure out a way to level the floor in the adaptive scenario. Provide taller ceiling height. Typically, you're looking at 8 feet clear in a parking garage, sometimes less than that, sometimes closer to 7 feet clear. For a residential property or an office building, you're going to want that closer to 9 feet, 8, 9 feet. So anyway, those are kind of the big picture questions. And another one is, keep the ramping as part of providing floors that are as level as practical. Keep the ramping off to one side or out of the footprint altogether. How do we address the floors? Well, you may or may not be familiar with the raised access floors. I've seen these actually in office buildings, especially the brutalist style office buildings where you got the exposed structure above, and then all your electrical, mechanical, and everything is running in the floor. And this is what something like this is what you would do to level out the floors in a parking facility. So here's just an exercise and what that might look like using our Flexpark approach. So we've designed this facility, for a current use, where everybody's self-parking, and planning for a future where there's more autonomy. We've made the floors relatively flat. We've got nice two-way circulation, comfortable parking bays, comfortable parking spaces. All the ramping is express ramps on the ends. Now there's a cost associated with that because you can't park on those express ramps. So you're building structure that you can't park on. So there's a premium. and we're getting 134 spaces a level. In the next phase, or a phase down the line, let's say parking or vehicles have become much more autonomous, and now many of the vehicles are able to park themselves. Not all of them, but a lot of them, or some of them, maybe half of them. And people are starting to use ride sharing more. Say this is in a more urban environment, mass transit's built out, and there's less personal vehicle use. So we've now said, okay, we don't need the parking on level 3, 4, and 5 anymore. We can convert 3 and 4 to office or residential, and let's make a nice public park, green space amenity on the roof level. And because vehicles are able to park themselves, or at least some of the vehicles are able to park themselves, we don't need quite as much space to park. So even the vehicles that have to be driven, have some sort of self-parking capability, like you see on some of the vehicles on the road today. You can get out of your car and it'll just pull into the space itself. So we can make the parking spaces a little tighter, maybe the drive aisles a little tighter. Still need to provide access for people to self-park though. So we're getting a little bit more, a little higher number of cars per floor, 141 cars per floor in this scenario. And then we go to this fully autonomous future. We're still going to have cars, because even if everything's a robot taxi, they still need some place to stage. They still need some place to charge. Some people will still want to have their own personal vehicles. And so we anticipate there will be some parking demand. What that is remains to be determined. But here we have set up those parking floors now to where the vehicles are completely parking themselves. It's back to that idealized model I showed earlier. The parking's much more tight in that space, and the parking layout is much more of a valet style layout where where cars can tandem park themselves and they can stack in the aisles and so on and so forth, because they're retrieving themselves and they're all talking to each other and they can move and do whatever automatically. Somebody asked the question, what does express ramp mean? An express ramp is a ramp from floor to floor, from parking level to parking level, that is steeper than the code maximum allowed for parking. And the building code allows a maximum slope for parking of 6.7%, 6.67%. So anything steeper than 6.67% slope cannot, by definition, have parking spaces on it. And in certain circumstances, we have to put ramps in garages that have 15, 18% slope sometimes to get from floor to floor to due to space constraints or whatever, and you can't park on those. So those are called express ramps. Some people call them speed ramps. So hopefully that answers your question. Here's it's a slightly different layout, but it's the same concept. It's an artist rendering. Here's the structure operating, in the current paradigm where everybody's self-parking, and in the future condition where everything's built out, we've taken the ramps off from the upper levels. We converted the upper 2 levels to office or residential. We put green space on the roof. There's some retail at grade, and we've adaptively reused this building. Any questions on that before I move on to some of the things that are going on in parking technology? All right, parking technology. There's basically 2 paradigms when it comes to parking operations. One is the uncontrolled or gateless, I don't want to say uncontrolled, but gateless facility, free in, free out, where you're letting basically anybody in and out, and then you're enforcing parking actively. The second option is a gated type of control, which you're familiar with. Somebody asked earlier about cashier booths and cashiered operations. Generally speaking, every once in a while we'll see a personal cashier. Now at airports, maybe it's a little different, or it is a little different. but generally speaking, most operations are either completely gateless or they have automated lanes to where there's no cashier transaction. Everything you're transacting with a machine. So what's happening in parking technology right now? I assume most of you at some point have paid for parking using your phone. That has become fairly ubiquitous, especially in the more urban areas. Although I went to the beach down around Charleston earlier, and every lot along the beach, even way out from the center areas, were all pay by phone. And these can be third-party vendors like Park Mobile or Passports or Flowbird, or a lot of the equipment vendors have their own proprietary systems, or frankly, they're not that hard to set up using in-house technology if you have that capability. So people drive in, there's no gate, they pay for parking using their phone. It's tied to your license plate typically. Sometimes it's tied to spaces, but most of the time it's license plate. And then you've got to enforce that. So how do you enforce it? Well, most places are using license plate recognition systems. It's camera mounted either on a vehicle or handheld camera on a unit. Vehicles are much more efficient and you can cover a lot more distance. The cameras read the license plate using optical character recognition. They understand the license plate, what's on the license plate. It checks that license plate against the database of vehicles that are approved to be in the facility. If it's a monthly subscriber or an employee, their license would be in the system. If it's an hourly patron, they would have paid for parking and using their license plate, and it would be in the system, and it would check it. It then flags the vehicles that are in violation, generally puts a GPS location on those, and generally takes a picture of the vehicle in the space so that if somebody comes back and contests, hey, I wasn't there. Yeah, here's the picture of your car. So it's a very efficient system, and we're starting to for the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of these ungated pay by license or license plate as a credential type parking operations. And that's for all user types, with a possible exception of airports. Once you get into gated facilities, everybody's taking a ticket, I assume, out of a machine, and that's still fairly prevalent. The main difference now is that most tickets are optical read tickets, and most of the cashiers have been eliminated, as I mentioned, and it's paying for your parking either at a pay on foot station or in a pay in lane type scenario like you see in the image on the right. Another thing that you can do with the optical reads is you can prepay for parking. Say there's an event that you want to, say you want to go to the concert, you can pre-buy your parking pass, either have it as a QR code on your phone or print out a piece of paper that has a QR code on it, use it to scan it to get in, scan it to get out. And then the other is, using touch to pay or Apple Pay, with your credit card, and that could be credit card in, credit card out, phone in, phone out. All those things are now part of the landscape. The old bulletproof version of access for monthly parking is the automated vehicle ID system, the AVI system, and that's been around 20 years or more, but it's still the state of the art. It's the fastest by far in terms of throughput, pushing vehicles through the lanes, and now most of those systems integrate with highway toll tags if desired. New technology, its extension of the license plate recognition systems is gated license plate in and out. Same premise as the vehicle mounted for enforcement. The challenge with any LPR system is that in the U.S., due to some crazy different kinds of license plates and the fact that people can put plate decorative things around their plates and variety of things going on there, along with environmental conditions and everything, is you're really only getting about a 90%, maybe a little better than 90% read rate for license plate recognition systems. And if you got a license plate system, you really need a backup type of credential just in case the fail, you get a failed read, and that would be a card or your phone, or you have to press the button on the intercom. And 90% sounds like a lot, but basically that means 1 out of every 10 customers is still having to deal with something secondary. So while we're starting to see more of these come into play, I just always give that caveat that the technology is not quite 100% baked yet. They work great in Europe and other places where everybody's got uniform licenses and whatnot. We get much better read rates there, but not so much in the U.S. I'm pushing the limit on time here. I'm going to keep going quickly. I got a few more slides, so hopefully everybody will bear with me. Another technology and operation system that you're seeing more and more of, is particularly in airports and larger facilities like shopping malls and whatnot, is the parking guidance systems. This directs parkers directly to the nearest available spaces by the shortest route, usually using LED lights, red lights for occupied, green light for available, sometimes blue light for ADA accessible, and so on and so forth. It reduces search time. It reduces idling. It's basically environmentally friendly, and it also, traditionally, once a garage was about 85% full, people would get frustrated looking for a space. They say, the garage is full, I'm leaving. By having these types of systems in there, you can drive up occupancy pretty darn close to 100% capacity. What do those systems look like? Well, there's video-based systems like the Indect and the Park Assist. There's also the old, a little bit more bulletproof ultrasonic or infrared type sensors that are also available. And these are collecting real-time accuracy, or real-time occupancy. So what can you do with that information? Well, you can push that out to variable message signage outside the garage. You can push that to variable message signage inside the garage. You can push it to mobile app or website telling people where parking is available. You can push it to third-party vendors that are reselling parking spaces like Spot Hero and other things. Real quickly, let me cover sustainable design for parking facilities. Back in 2010. In summer of 2010, the U.S. GBC, Green Building Council, who oversees LEED certification of buildings, disallowed parking facilities, standalone parking facilities, from becoming LEED certified. As a reaction to that, the Green Parking Council was formed, and they came up with a standard, not really in competition with LEED, but standard that was similar to LEED for parking facilities, and that ran for a few years. And then in 2015, GBCI actually purchased the green parking certification, green garage certification, and compiled it into a new sustainability standard for parking facilities called ParkSmart certification. ParkSmart is very similar to LEED in certain aspects, in terms of design and construction and some of the features that need to be incorporated with garages. But it also is very parking operations focused. So about half of the measures are related specifically to parking operations, and there are different certification levels. There's Pioneer certification, where you can go back and certify something that's already built, and then there's bronze, silver, gold, analogous to what what LEED is doing with, LEED, silver, gold, platinum, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to get into all of these, but just to touch on a few specific to parking. This may be a little counterintuitive, but the number one thing that you got to do for sustainable parking systems is to charge for parking. I know if anybody's read Don Shoup and his thoughts on parking operations knows this intuitively, but the idea is that there's no such thing as free parking. Free parking is a valuable resource, and you want to convey that to people so that they understand that they this thing has a value to it, and if there is free parking available, it'll encourage people to drive from point A to point B, where they might if they understood that there's a reasonable way to park here, and everybody's going to charge there's no reason to move my car. I can just walk from point A to point B. So parking fees are a fundamental piece of a sustainable parking system. Another aspect of sustainable parking design is right sizing the parking facility, using shared parking where it's applicable. The one I always point out on the usage patterns on the left, these are number of cars occupying a facility during different times of the day. And if you'll notice, the office occupancy has almost an inverse relationship with the hotel. People are coming to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're generally leaving about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the exact opposite is true for a hotel. So if you invert the office, it fits nicely into that gap of the hotel. So let's just build enough parking for that maximum occupancy rather than doubling it up and getting these seas of parking. So there's right sizing the parking. There's different ways of handling that. Parking next to transit, I alluded to that earlier in the development section. Using natural ventilation, making sure that you're using as little energy as you can in these facilities, using energy efficient lighting fixtures, and making sure that you're not expending wasteful energy on these things. You can see in this one also that's got on-site energy generation. That's another factor, another feature that can be incorporated, using photovoltaics, solar panels to generate, or even wind turbines to generate some of the energy for the facility. And I am at the end of my presentation. I will, for those of you that want to stick around, I'll try to go back and answer some of these questions that are coming up in the chat. And feel free to ask questions if you have burning questions right now. Let's see. Scrolling back through the questions. Florian asked about thoughts on the risks of AVs catching on fire. Yeah, or EVs catching on fire in parking garages. He says in Europe, there's cities that do not allow EVs in public garages. Interesting. I haven't run across that yet, but yeah, he's absolutely right that if an electric vehicle catches on fire, the batteries burn and they're very difficult to put out. They burn for days. Jim Anderson asked about special deck coating, anti-static around the deck or around the EV charging stations. I haven't run into that. I will say that while it's not explicitly required in the code that we found anywhere, although it may eventually become that, we do try to make electric vehicle charging spaces accessible, or at least a portion of them accessible in the same way that we would do a disabled accessible, an ADA space. We don't generally sign those as restricted to accessible vehicles, but we do try to be accommodating in that respect. Next question, building a garage now, what % of the spaces should we plan for EV charging in an airport environment? Well, airports are an interesting animal. You, if you got long-term parking, you really don't want somebody to come in and plug their EV into a charging station and leave it there for a week, and then, you know, their car is charged within, you know, 6 hours or whatever, and now they're hogging up the space. So at airport environments, we generally suggest EV charging in the short-term parking areas only, or in valet controlled areas. So, but that's an interesting conversation, probably beyond the scope of today. What are your thoughts on cities' required parking ratios reduction, particularly in mixed use and retail sites? Yeah, so the parking ratios in most cities are a lot of cities, not most cities. A lot of cities have somewhat antiquated parking requirements, and a lot of cities, frankly, are going to no minimums, using things like fee in lieu of parking or something along that lines, so that you know, where the fee would be paid to the city to maintain a public parking facility in lieu of putting more parking in your development. But there's different kinds of strategies, and we can certainly discuss that. But yeah, reducing the amount of parking on site, there's some logic there, and actually we're doing a couple studies right now, that very topic. Thomas, let's see, significant studies on when AVs malfunction. I have not seen any significant studies on when AVs malfunction, but I will say that you've seen the technology hype curve, and I've seen a lot of recently where they put AV on sort of the downward side of the hype curve to where we're heading towards the valley of despair, or whatever they call it, because some of the early promises and Elon Musk's bromides are not being realized as quickly as people thought they might be. But I'm optimistic that the vehicles will continue to advance in that respect, but I haven't seen anything specific about malfunction of vehicles. Do I anticipate needing to retrofit majority of parking facilities for EVs? You know, I think it becomes a customer supply and demand issue. I don't know that you would see many municipalities or jurisdictions requiring that, but your customers may demand it, and it may be a market-driven thing. And you're absolutely right that the electrical service in the building is probably not sized in older buildings to handle the demands of electrical vehicle charging. Cashier booths I talked about, mechanical parking price point I talked about, express ramps I talked about. Somebody asked about the PowerPoint presentation. I think we can distribute that without any trouble if we've got your email address. How does WGI charge for a parking analysis for a small community by the project or the billable hours? Well, you know, everything's a unique situation. Generally speaking, we're tailoring our fees and scope to the project. So yeah, it could be organized either way, but I encourage you to give us a call and we'll work through that. One last question here. Do you have any data on the incidence of damage to vehicles in mechanical parking? Now, that's an interesting question. Ben Sands and I were kind of looking for some of that a while back, and I don't know that we've captured anything particularly informative, but yeah, that's an interesting question. And in mechanical parking systems, there has to be a certain amount of redundancy. Just in general, this is a related subject, but in general, there has to be a certain amount of redundancy, because if the system breaks down or part of the system breaks down, nobody gets their car. So you got to be able to plan for that. As far as how it damages cars, I'm not 100% sure, but I could certainly envision, moisture and everything else, and oil and whatnot dripping, and that's why they require lots of maintenance. The Europeans and the Japanese have an employment structure that allows for, sort of on-site, personalized, hands-on type maintenance. But in the U.S., that's not necessarily where we are. So, one last thing I'd like to mention before I wrap up and not seeing any more questions. Florian just chimed in. He says he's a mechanical parking guy. He says 14,000 stalls installed in the U.S. and 4 damaged cars in 30 years. Okay. Thanks, Florian. Appreciate that. Anyway, last thing I'd like to say before I close out here. Thanks everybody for coming. We have another parking focused presentation here coming up on July 1st. Nicole Schnia and Ben Sands are going to do a presentation on enhancing the parking ecosystem, which expands on some of the scenario planning and operations discussion that I have jumped in here. And any other things? Looking at other questions. Bear with me just a second here. See some more questions. Do the construction operating costs for garages include new fire sprinkler requirements? No, those numbers that I quoted earlier are not taking into account fire sprinklers. Are there concerns about mechanical parking facilities and noise built with other uses? To a certain extent, it's probably more about vibration than it is noise. But if you're putting them underneath, it's not that big of a deal. But that's the case with any mixed use, not just mechanical. Are there structural loading differences between cars and let's see, and adaptation to say office? Yes. Cars are actually, parking garages are actually fairly lightly loaded. It's 40 pounds a square foot. Live load. Offices, you have corridors at 100 pounds a square foot. If you have data, rooms, it can be, somewhere in that range. If you have, libraries or something like that, you're talking about 200 pounds a square foot. So yeah, there's definitely differences. Actually out in the office spaces, it's somewhat similar to parking, but you gotta be careful because in offices, there's defined corridors for egress and so on. Regarding future use, do you have a rule of thumb on associated impact to have flat floors at the end of the structure? Rule of thumb, it's probably a 25% increase in the cost to put the ramps outside and have flat floors. But if you have something specific, let's talk and we can discuss the specifics of yours. With structured parking being built primarily of concrete, are your designs explored embodied carbon reduction? Not explicitly, Jim. We're not looking at that yet. And that's an interesting topic to explore. Another question, anonymous attendee asks, do cities receive the revenue from pay by phone apps, or does that money go to the company? Well, typically where cities have set up agreements with pay by mobile payment providers, they will provide the revenue. There's usually a service charge to the user applied on top of that. So if it's $2 an hour for parking, the city's getting $2 an hour for parking, and the user's getting dinged a 15-cent service charge for the convenience of using that, or something along those lines. Hopefully I've answered everybody's questions, and hopefully we can talk about your project moving forward. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.